Hello. Hi, welcome here. We are in a building off of Wilshire. We're not supposed to say the name of the building for some weird reason, but, but we're here.
It's part of the deal.
My name is John August. I host a podcast called Scriptnotes, where we talk about screenwriting and things that are interesting to screenwriters. And a couple of weeks ago, we asked, what are the issues that we're not paying enough attention to? And so our listeners wrote in, and one of the things that they said we were not paying enough attention to was assistant pay in Hollywood, and how the low payment of assistants is really hurting ability to move up through the pipeline and sort of who can enter the business. And Craig Mazin, the co-host, and I both agreed that's something we need to focus on. What we hadn't anticipated is that so many people would write in with emails about their experiences with low pay as assistants and how it's really impacting their ability to make a living, but also to grow up through the industry. And so we've been sort of reading those emails on the show. Megan Rao, our assistant, has been doing a great job sort of keeping track of all those. Thank you. And reading through those. And one of the best things about the podcast is it's very easy to keep people's privacy because we can change names, we can remove little details. As we started thinking about doing a town hall, we wanted to maintain that privacy while still getting people together in a room. So some ground rules for today is no one's going to say their names except for the people who are up on the stage, and you're not going to be seen on the live stream unless you're up here on the stage. So we're trying to both be including folks, but also respecting privacy as much as possible. So thank you all for coming here. If you're watching on the live stream, thank you for watching on the live stream. After we have some initial conversation up here, we're going to open up for questions. So people here in the house can ask questions. But if you want to ask a question and you're watching on the live stream, you're going to write to PayUpHollywood, all one word, @gmail.com. Megan is manning that email account right now, and so she will be reading some questions that come in during this live stream. So great. The ground rules for today. Let me introduce who I have up here with me. So first off, Liz Alper. Liz Alper is a TV writer-producer. She serves on the WGA Board of Directors. She spearheaded the WGA Solidarity Challenge staffing grid and the PayUpHollywood hashtag. That was your invention.
Yes,
Nicely
that
done.
was. Thank you.
Liz, now once you started PayUpHollywood, that hashtag, you were getting in a bunch of stories from people, just sort of anecdotes, but you're also trying to get some real data. Can you talk to us about the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So as most of you in this room know, that we started a survey November 15th with the intention of collecting data to get a real good look at what assistants are facing right now. I brought some of it with me, and I can talk about now, I can talk about later, but...
Give us one factoid to get us angry.
So here's one factoid. Here's one thing. In order not to be considered rent burden for the average, Angelino, average rent right now in Los Angeles that everyone pays is $1,340 a month. So you would have to be making $53,600 in order not to be considered rent burden. As of right now, 62.76% of assistants are making less than $50K. So, and with that, the 53,600 number would have to be after taxes. This is before taxes. Right. So there you go. There's your factoid right there. So this is why PayUpHollywood is important.
Yes. So it's not just you. LA is crazy expensive and you're not being paid enough. Next, let's introduce Gemara Haner. She's a political consultant based here in LA. Over the past 15 years, she's worked for Kamala Harris, Mike Bloomberg, the California Democratic Party, with the labor movement on Fight for 15 and helping people transition from homelessness, incarceration, and foster care into safe, well-paying careers. Gemara, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, yeah.
Talk to us about, you have policy experience that none of us do. So talk to us about sort of why this is interesting to you.
Absolutely. So I got introduced to Liz and her amazing co-founder, Deirdre. Hi, Deirdre. She's watching at home. We miss you. Around the clock for the past month, and really on sort of this amazing current moment that's going on, this very cathartic, just scream of this is killing us and it's unacceptable and it's happening right now, but then also kind of shifting to what's next, right? So I keep thinking about it in present tense and future tense. There are a lot of different things that future tense can look like for people individually, for groups of people, for collective groups of people, potentially individual people who want to look at crafting better pace for themselves. But everything I've worked on starts in that same moment. Something is not working, something is broken, and we have to fix it. So in California, we've seen a lot of that over the past couple of years. Does anyone here drive like Lyft, Uber, gig economy workers? Have you before? Yeah.
A few hands here.
Absolutely. So one thing you might have noticed over the past 5 years is a court case and new legislation saying, hey, let's actually treat our gig economy workers like human beings. Crazy thought. College athletes have seen the same kind of thing over the past few months, where before we're getting paid absolutely nothing in like quadrillion-dollar industries. And now as California, we're saying that's not okay. So we just have a different attitude towards how we've historically treated people at the very bottom sometimes, or that very first step in extremely profitable industries. So that's where we are looking at, with no conclusions of where we want to go, but just saying this is more than just a current conversation. This can be something much longer term and probably should be.
Great. Finally, let's introduce Alison Begelman. She's a writer, community organizer, and the founder and president of Young Entertainment Activists, an impact agency that creates action-oriented experiences to ignite a globally conscious community of young professionals. She previously worked at companies including CAA and Annapurna, and in multiple writers' rooms. Alison, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Alison, can you talk to us about what, do you pronounce it YEA or YEA? How are you pronouncing it?
Everyone has a different, yeah. Is usually,
Yeah, pronounce yeah. Mm-hmm. So what is the goal behind your organization?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, a lot of people came into the industry in the past few years because after Me Too, everyone was like, oh, I want to come into the industry and like actually make change with my content. That's like a new thing. Even though people have been doing it for years, now we get to talk about it. So for me, I come from organizing, and so I was like, and writing. So as soon as I came in, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. There's got to be other people that want to do it too. And so our goal was to create a hub for young Hollywood to have entertainment and activism together, so we can actually have conversations with people instead of at drinks, networking and what can I do for you? What do you need from me? How like the need thing. Instead, we can bond over other things that are like our passions, our activist passions. And again, with activism, it's always been, the bigger, the grass tops, the participant works on big blockbusters and that type of impact. But our thing is like young people in Hollywood from where you're sitting at your desk can make an impact, even if it's just having a conversation with your boss or we give you the tools is basically why this was necessary. Mm-hmm.
So I was an assistant 20 years ago in Hollywood, and what struck me about that time is that assistants were very networked, but it wasn't networked in the same way. It was a bunch of like phone calls going back and forth. You got to know people or out at drinks. Through this process of the last couple months, I've seen how incredibly tightly networked so many assistants are and how word gets out very quickly. I think what I was surprised, though, is that it felt like a bunch of assistants were aware that there was a problem, but that there wasn't a spearhead to sort of actually make a change. And so hopefully this is a thing that we can start talking about today.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about some scope and overall what goals should be of this session here today. I think we need to start by talking who are we actually focusing on, because Los Angeles is a giant town. There's a bunch of people who are at the beginning levels of careers. But as we've had sort of initial discussions, it feels like we're talking about folks who are assistants in the entertainment industry, and assistants who are probably working at a desk in the entertainment industry rather than sort of set PAs, which is another sort of important community, but it's not sort of the same issue as what a lot of us are dealing with here in this room. The common traits I notice about the people we're talking about is we all tend to have college degrees. We are taking this job as an assistant as a starter job to move up. It's not our goal to be doing this job for the next 20 years. This is a job we're doing for now to move up the ranks into our actual dream career. And the other thing which is different about assistants in this entertainment industry is we have a tremendous amount of expenses that are atypical from other industries. And so things like clothing, like how we're supposed to be able to dress for this job. We're supposed to be able to see every movie. We're supposed to just be up to date on everything. We're sort of expected to have a car and be able to drive stuff around, but that's not being paid for by anybody else. So we have to come into this job with all these things, which really creates a barrier for access to who could even start this job.
Yeah, that was one thing that Deirdre, who unfortunately is not here today.
Deirdre's off on scripts today.
And we love her. But this is something that she and I have talked about. And at the very beginning of PayUpHollywood, the reason we wanted to bring attention to these issues wasn't just because we wanted to actually have everyone fully aware of the abuses that were going on, both work and financial, but we also wanted to point out that there is now a paywall enacted around Hollywood that means that most candidates from a certain socioeconomic background are not going to be able to participate. And considering that assistants are basically the apprentices of Hollywood right now, you are the next generation of executives and writers and directors and hair and makeup leaders and post editors, and every aspect of the industry is going to, be turning to you to lead the way. The fact that we are unfortunately making it so that many people, especially people of color and people with disabilities, are unable to participate in these sorts of apprenticeships means that we're going to have a homogenized community. We keep talking about diversity and inclusion in Hollywood and trying to impress that upon the masses, that that's something that we need. That's why we need movies that are more inclusive. That's why we need more actors and more faces who look more like the faces of everyone in America. But unfortunately, we've made it so that those candidates can't afford to be here. And so the best way that we can actually start introducing diversity and inclusion into our ranks is if we start paying for it. And it's going to take, an industry-wide effort to make sure that we are going to be as inclusive as we want to be.
And Gemara, some of the emails we've gotten in detail some really horrific behavior that's happening in Hollywood. How do we see pay intersecting with how people are treated?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that was really striking to me when I got involved was some of the myths that are out there right now of people saying, I started an assistant, 45 years ago, and it was tough. I couldn't go out for drinks or buy the new whatever with my friends, but I did it for a year, and now I just won a Golden Globe, and that's great for them. That is just no poker face. That is also just not the Los Angeles of 2019. So there, I think people who are just well-meaning but uninformed out there. So part of the reason that we started with the survey, and actually Liz has some great data preliminarily that we've gotten, and thank you to the over 1,100 people that have taken the survey so far, is to combat that misinformation with just facts. Right? That you have a lot of amazing stories and that color is really helpful, but also just the numbers are the numbers. Once you start to put that back at people, whether it's individual people that you work with, employers that you work with, or certainly members of the press who've been fantastic allies in this, that it's really hard for people to push back and say, oh my God, I actually had no idea that you're getting paid $10,000 less than what it takes to just be barely making it in Los Angeles. And for most people, once they can do that math for themselves, are more open to helping or just having a conversation based in reality versus a story that they heard that someone who's done extremely well, that's just not something that's really apples to apples anymore. So.
Yeah, and just jumping into that too, because I think one thing that I want everybody to keep in mind is, even though this is an infuriating situation, everyone has every right to be upset and depressed and frustrated with a lot of these numbers, just keep in mind that you can't fix what we don't know. Like, none of us can fix what we don't know. And that's why education is going to be our strongest weapon in making sure that you guys are getting the pay that you deserve. And by speaking out and by providing us with data, you have changed your experiences from hypothetical into undeniable. So if you haven't taken the survey yet, please, let us know. Send us an email at PayUpHollywood. We'd be happy to send you the link. We're trying to collect as much data as we can before December 1st, and then we're going to be releasing it in early December. So just to talk about, you were saying pay your dues. There's a pay your dues culture in Hollywood where it just says, just deal with this for as long as you're an assistant, and then you'll get to move up and all of your dreams are going to come true. Well, how long do you have to pay your dues? Because 47% of the survey takers as of right now, 47% of those 1,100 people who have taken the survey have been assistants for 3 or more years. And 21% of those survey takers have been assistants for more than 5 years. As of right now, 67.17% of assistants have reported currently or previously having to take outside work in order to supplement their income in order to survive. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying pay your dues. We're no longer just saying take the low paycheck. We're saying figure out how, on top of your 60-hour work week, you can work a second job so that you can make that rent, so you can afford to go out and see those movies that your bosses want you to go see or are requiring you to go see. So you can purchase that 16th streaming subscription that is now required to keep in the loop on all the programming. So all of these numbers right now that we're providing, they're preliminary, but it's indicative of the fact that 2019 in Los Angeles, you cannot survive on the paycheck that you are being given. And it's the same paycheck that people were being given in 2009. And in some cases, it's the same paycheck they were making in 1999. And so it's no wonder that 91.54% of you guys said that your current job has led to increased feelings of anxiety.
Now, Alison, Alison, we were talking backstage, and you were describing a recent job you'd had and a job that you'd had, Liz, that were being paid the same, but there's like a 10-year gap between the two of them.
Yeah.
And that is
Yep.
indicative of sort of like of wages not going up. Let's talk for a moment about the number, and imagine a number that is a livable wage in Los Angeles, a livable wage for someone working as an assistant in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles. And how would we discover that number? Because what I think in our preliminary conversations is we don't want to sort of pick a number and have that be the goal without having some data behind it, without having some real sense of what it is. So it feels like it's going to come from partial rent, like the ability to afford to live in the town which you're working. There's an expectation about transportation. There's an expectation about wardrobe. There's an expectation about, going to movies is not a luxury when you're an assistant. You're expected to keep up on all these things. How will we arrive at this number, and when do we think we might have some data off this survey to really get to a number?
I think we're also going to be talking at the end, we're going to be giving people homework, so be prepared for that, just to try and figure out how much people really need to make in order to live comfortably. And by living comfortably, I mean being able to pay all of your rent, all of your bills, and not feel like you have to go out and take a second job in order to make a living. The other thing that we never talk about are savings, because right now assistants are living hand to mouth, and we've received so many stories of people who have said, I would love to leave my current job and I can't, because if I leave, I have zero savings, I have no way of paying rent, I don't have family that I can rely on to help me make it through until I find another job, so I'm just stuck here. And that's a common theme. So I think what we're going to be talking about are, instead of hypotheticals, instead of thinking of, I wish I made enough money so I could pay my rent with 1 week of pay, or I wish I could pay all of my utility bills with just 1 week and still have enough money to put into savings so that if I have to go to the hospital, if I get into a car accident, I don't have to stress out about having to cover those expenses, or even just how much do you need to make in order to not go into credit card debt? Because I know when I left as an assistant, I loved my job, I loved my boss. I still left with $20K in credit card debt, and that was just because I had to survive, and the cash in my bank account was for rent, and the cards were for the other expenses that were required of me for my job. So I have some facts, which I'm willing to share, but let's get through everybody else first.
I just want to jump in really quickly there. One thing that I was not surprised by, but is worth, I think, mentioning when you start to look at the data is another misconception that people have is assistants are 23 years old, you're just out of college, you're going home and like eating cup of noodles, and that's what your whole life is, right? And it's just you. But as we see people start to work longer or work later in their lives into their mid-30s or even beyond, it's not just you, right? It's a child that you might have or you and your partner might have. It's parents you're responsible for or any number of other things. So it's not just you anymore. And that's a really critical part of our economy that people just forget when you're just looking at that myth.
And something I can just speak to personally is I graduated college. Didn't go and live I went to a top 5 agency working as a receptionist where you're working 12-hour days, like really, and pay not great. And I wasn't, I didn't have a family to go live with, which I would say like 50 to 60% of the mailroom class at this agency, everyone lived with their parents here. So I was paying rent, and the rent I was paying, I lived in a house by Adams. It was like 8 people, and I split it with my partner at the time. So I was paying like $300, $400, and that's how I could like survive working at this agency, And for people who couldn't even afford that, like I feel bad about it, but I was thinking about it today. And I was just like, wow,
Absolutely. And before we go back to Liz, she mentioned the World Paywall, which is great for so many reasons, but also true. these numbers mean nothing to you if you don't have to, if you're lucky enough, and again, like sincerely, good for you if this is your situation. But if it doesn't really matter what you're taking home because it's just not a concern that you have, then the numbers actually don't matter. So if you're making 30, that's great because that's like shoe money or beer money. And that's nice, not like trying to find a safe place to live money. So it does end up creating situations where it's just one type of person who's able to do this. And that's what privilege looks like. It is invisible if you have it. So it's not that people are aggressively out there trying to keep someone out. It's just that you don't even notice it because your life is fine.
Yeah. Well, even to that with employers, they don't realize that their assistants are hurting because, they're giving them the $750 a week, $800 a week, not realizing that, more than almost half of all assistants in the industry are receiving financial help from their parents. And in some cases, that's just assumed that's going to happen. So you are assuming that these candidates for these assistant positions actually come from means that will allow them to survive doing this bare bones sort of job.
That's because the people who are their bosses who rose up through assistance, they had the parents there to do it. So
Right.
It's natural they're making this assumption because they are remembering their own experience. And they're not asking the questions of what the real expenses are and sort of what people have as resources.
Right. But also they're not asking who's being kept out because of it. And what are we losing? Like, who are the brilliant people that we're losing and the different kinds of voices that we're losing because we're not providing an environment where they can survive and they can thrive? So, yeah.
Alison and Gemara, I'm curious, a year from now, if we were looking at our progress, or then 5 years from now, how would we measure progress? How would we see that things have changed or things have improved? Because you've done policy work, you've seen stuff happen. What would progress look like a year from now?
Absolutely. So I think a couple different things. One, just people being able to make conscious choices or having to make conscious choices. If you're choosing to pay someone this, I at least want you to know that that's a conscious choice that you're making in a data-informed way rather than just that's what I thought has always been done. I didn't even really take a look at it. I think that's one conversation. I think another conversation is bringing awareness in the same way that the amazing folks over at Time's Up and other places have done for the issues that they're working on. They set a very intentional path, and we've been so grateful to have had some conversations with them and other amazing groups to say how can we provide options for people that want to have what other options there are. So for me, it's just maximum awareness, maximum options, and we'll talk about some of your individual options in just a bit. And then also, a conversation around, is this right? For me as a business, as someone in power in a business, whether studio, agency, whatever, is this right? Can I change it? And being able for us to show them what the math is to say, this does not break the bank. If you look at your over-the-top marketing budget or anything else, you can do it. The cash is there. This is not a Great Depression where everyone's tightening their belts. You can do it if you choose to. Or if you're not choosing to, here's what you have to do because that's the law. So either it's because they're just human beings and it's how you should treat them, or having current protections or maybe future protections in place so that for people who don't want to do it, you can still work in this industry. And for all of you guys, a year from now, a lot of you are going to have moved up into slightly higher positions. And my long-term homework for you guys is when you do get to that place, if you do stay in the industry, and I hope you do, when you're saying, I get to make a conscious choice now around my department budget, remember this moment. Please don't forget about this. Don't let that privilege become invisible to you.
I think for me, number one, of course, being able to have open conversations about this. This is the first time I feel like we've really been able to talk to, even going out with friends in the industry, like you don't talk about what you make. And I don't care, like I'm open about it. So just having the conversation, having the space to have the conversation. I'll get into more about what YEA wants to do with that later. And the other thing, which is pretty, I guess, radical, but I think every boss should know how much their assistant makes in accordance with, right? And there should be an open conversation about that, and then look at their own paycheck and be like, hey, check their check. You gotta know that if they're making this much money and your assistant's making this much money, it's just not acceptable.
Liz, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to add to that because I think it's right now what also needs to happen is that bosses just need to have the conversation about what your life is like. Because, you and I had the conversation in the green room about making the exact same amount of money 10 years, 10 years different. And the cost of living from 2011 to today is drastically different. And I think just as we go along, we kind of acclimate to the rising costs, and so we don't even notice when the amount of money that we would have made in 2011 may not cover the same costs that would in 2019. So it's just like having these open conversations about everything. And it's uncomfortable, but it has to happen.
Yeah, and if I can just speak to that, it's really like if you're getting a bump, like a promotion, and you're gonna take the pay cut. For most people, if you don't have to worry about paying for things outside, you'll take the pay cut because it's a title rise, and that's how they get you. Though they're gonna make you a coordinator, you get twice as much responsibility, and why would you get pay raise? You're getting a title bump, and that's good for you because you're closer to moving up. And the same with me in that job. So it's like
I'm laughing because it's BoJack Horseman.
Yeah,
it's BoJack Horseman.
When I watched BoJack Horseman, I was like, this is happening.
Yeah. I have actually gotten comments. We did an LA Times article a few weeks ago, and all of the comments in the comments section were like, "Oh, well, they just ripped off BoJack Horseman."
So this, if this were a college course, like this would be sort of the general overview, sort of like the survey. This is what we're going to talk about over the course of the semester. But in our initial conversations, the intention is to break down and have smaller conversations about very specific issues. So I wanted to give you a little heads up of things that may be happening over the next year as we continue this conversation. So we want to have a conversation about agencies and sort of assistants at agencies and the special cases there, assistants in the writer's room, assistants in production, and so what it's like when a show is in production and sort of how that changes the assistant's role, personal assistants who work for individuals who are doing more personal stuff, and the uncomfortable overlap between people who are supposed to be executive assistants who are doing a lot of personal stuff. The role of unions. Healthcare costs, a thing we've heard repeatedly is that people are scared to leave this job because their insurance is tied to a job. Non-disclosure agreements and what to do about non-disclosure agreements. And you need to tell us what else we need to have discussions about. So part of the goal of today is to let us know what other things we need to be talking about that we're not talking about enough. Now, we have some special people here who can talk about very specific issues, including legal issues. Jamara, do you want to take the con for this?
Absolutely. So most of us are probably not in the 20 minutes of free time a week you have. Also, employment, wage and hour law junkies. So I figured we should start there of just what are your rights? What protections do you have? Because again, that's at like future tense, but present tense conversation as well. What are you currently seeing, and what in the short term can people, if they choose to, do? So one of the partners we've reached out to is the California Employment Lawyers Association. So we have 3 amazing people here who've been talking a bit with us, and I just wanted to give sort of a general overview of employment law, kind of federally in California as it relates to this industry, and then what some of your options and protections are if you have not memorized all of them, because that is not what you guys do for a day job, but it's what they do for a day job, and they're extremely good. So I wanted to introduce just real quick Jennifer, Tony, and May from CELA, California Employment Lawyers Association, and thank you guys so much. Oh yeah, I think the live stream. Yeah. I think the camera kind of starts about here, so. And if afterwards you guys want to talk about any specific questions, they can't give you individual legal advice today, but can talk generally and are very much here. So one thing we're going to be doing going forward is if you decide, completely your choice, that you might want to potentially file a claim or do something else, we're going to be referring you to CELA's members, reputable employment attorneys, not whatever you saw on a bus stop. Huge Saul Goodman dig there. But just to give you a general sense of what your options are should you choose to go down that route.
All right, so again, my name is... Oh, okay. My name is Jennifer Kramer. I've been practicing in the area of employment law for 20 years, and I'm part of what's called the California Employment Lawyers Association. This is a group of about 1,500 employment lawyers in California who represent employees in the workplace. And so we're sort of your first stop if you're have an employment issue of people to talk to. And the first thing I wanted to say to you all today is you being here and participating in this is protected under the Labor Code. Under Labor Code 923, even if you're not in a union, if you're engaged in what we call concerted action, or meeting together in a group like this, this is what's called a protected activity, getting together and talking about your working conditions. And so when you go into work on Monday, if you're being questioned about it or asked about it, know that you're here today and that you were protected under the labor code, okay? So you can Google Labor Code 923. It's one of my favorite statutes. I won't
Love
take
that you
up.
have a favorite statute. That's
Everybody has
adorable.
a favorite statute. I love 923. And so, that can help you sleep a little bit better tonight, then I can give you that. What we'd really love to work with you guys on doing is setting up specific sessions to talk about employment law issues that you may have questions about. We have a part of our organization is called a Know Your Rights, where we go out and we do outreach in the community, educating employees, because it's not all about litigating what we do. We also like educating people about what their rights are. And so we'd love to work with your organization to set up sessions where we can specifically address wage theft issues, harassment, retaliation. And so that's something we'd love to work with you on. The other piece of advice that you'll always hear from an attorney is, even if you are not ready to sue somebody or it's not even on your radar, document, document, document. And in this day and age, that also means back up, back up, back up, because the text messages you're sharing now with an abusive employer might disappear in 6 months. So these are things to just sort of put on your radar right now. And then we'd also love to work with your organization on putting together a toolkit for things to look for, what's right and wrong in the jobs. My particular focus, and I'll just talk about it for just a minute, is on wage theft issues, wage and hour. I've been practicing in this area since, I'll say, the turn of the century. And so, what I always lead off in saying is the biggest part of any business's budget is labor, and they are always going to try and figure out a way to save on labor. When I first started practicing, everybody was an exempt manager. They were all managers, and nobody was entitled to overtime. And that, and we fought that, and we got great decisions and great verdicts. And so now what everybody was doing, until the California Supreme Court put a stop to it, is calling everybody an independent contractor. Now you're an independent contractor and you're not entitled to the protections that an employee is. And last year, you may have heard of it, there was a case where the California Supreme Court simplified what the elements are to be an employee and an independent contractor. But these are sort of when you become an independent contractor, you're giving up your rights to overtime and breaks and unemployment and workers' compensation, and and so really, that's the number one way that employers right now are trying to save money. But on other wage theft issues, there are still employers that will tell people that they're exempt from overtime and they're not entitled to it. You should be educated on what the actual elements of that test are, and not just believe your employer when they tell you that. You are entitled to expense reimbursements. You cannot waive your right to be reimbursed for work-related expenses. Nobody can ask you to waive your right to that, okay? So even if your employer isn't reimbursing you for them, keep track of them, because someday there's a 4-year statute of limitations for those types of claims. It varies depending on the statute, but keep track of the expenses that you are accruing. Document, 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 because maybe someday that's something that you'll want to do something about, or maybe when it comes, that's something that you want to bring to your employer and talk to them about.
Just really quickly, right now, about half of the people who took this survey reported they're either not reporting or not seeking reimbursements for expenses because they're afraid of some sort of negative repercussion from that, or they just do not think they're going to get it back. So this is a very real thing for maybe half the people in this room, or certainly half of the people who took the survey.
And just also really quickly, and again, Tony and I could spend a half a day at least with all of you guys educating you on the law, which I think is the first step in your movement, is understanding, so that you can stand up to your employer and say, well, you know what, that's actually illegal, or maybe phrase it a little bit nicer than that, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm just going to spell it out for you. But, and so, to know that you should get paid for all the hours that you work. And you need to understand what that means, all the hours that you work, travel time that you spend doing things, time you spend responding to texts and emails, time you spend waiting to have to do something. These are all things that can be considered hours worked. And so even if you're not turning in accurate time to your employer, because I think I saw in the survey that people are afraid to accurately turn in their hours, keep a little notebook for yourself of the hours you are actually working, because maybe someday you do want to do something about it. But right now, like I said, the first step is educating yourself about what your rights are, so you can bring those concerns to your employer. If they don't do anything about it, then maybe you can talk to an attorney, which will work with your organization to set up a referral panel. And then also, retaliation is illegal. So, changing the terms and conditions of your employment because you engaged in a protected activity. So making a complaint about not getting paid for all your hours worked is protected under the law. Okay, and then Tony's going to talk a little bit about some other workplace concerns.
Well, I'm Tony Haramy, and I've been doing employment law, wage and hour, harassment under the government code, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, for over 23 years. And I am here to tell you that there is hope, and that the law in California and all the laws in California are so protective of employees. We are very pro-employee state in terms of the laws. And a lot of it is from the movement up in Sacramento. I was involved in the Me Too movement, in which we went up to Sacramento and we changed a lot of the laws in the labor code and the government code that actually helps and protects, our California workers, and I'll touch upon those. But the law is very protective. One other labor code that the panel talked about is that an employer can't make you patronize their movie. You expect you to go to a movie and pay money to watch it, or to live stream and pay a subscription. That's a labor code violation. They can't make you do that. It's just like saying, okay, well, you got to buy the copy paper in this office. It's the same thing. You can't make an employee purchase things of value and patronize the employer. So there's labor code violations. And in terms of documenting, so Jennifer talked about emails and text messages. That's a timesheet, because we look at, in a lot of our cases where our clients aren't taking accurate records, or they say, yeah, well, I was, my boss texted me like at 2 in.the morning to ask me to do blah, blah, blah. Do you have that text? There's,
Keep
there's
the receipts.
There's the date and
Back
the
up,
time.
back up.
it up. It's like, boom, here's my timesheet. I was working at 2 in.the morning, okay? So there's like things like that, we'd love to, share in like a day, know your rights program. Another thing, you have a right to talk about the terms and conditions of your employment under the labor code. No one can say that you cannot go out there and say, what's your salary? What am I getting paid? Or for you to ask somebody and have that conversation. That's protected activity, and that an employer can't ask you to refrain from doing that. NDAs. So another thing that came out of the Me Too movement, and a lot of things that are happening, not just in this industry, but harassment and abuses that are happening to legal assistants. Right? That's happening. I mean, is that in the survey? It's like, yeah. So if you have a claim of sexual harassment or gender discrimination, and that applies to discrimination, LGBTQs that are protected, all those types of gender bias claims and harassment, you cannot have a settlement agreement that is confidential and that you are banned. I call them gag order provisions. They call it secret settlement. I call them gag order provisions. You can't be silenced for having and bringing up those claims and and signing a settlement agreement, unless you want to. You have a choice. You don't have to file a claim and to enter into those types of agreements. So the two bodies of laws that protect are the Labor Code and the Fair Employment and Housing Act, the Government Code, the California laws that protect you from discrimination, from not getting equal pay based on gender and national origin and race, and harassment. And the one last thing I'll say, because there's a misconception with regards to harassment, is people believe that to have a harassment lawsuit, you have to have more than 5 employees. A lot of situations are just the assistant to the one, executive or the one person, and that's your one employer. Harassment applies to employers of just one person, you. It also applies to independent contractors. So even if you are truly an independent contractor or an employee, the harassment laws protect you.
Thank you guys so much. That's tremendously helpful.
Thanks for having us here today.
I have actually I have materials like the wage orders over here, so feel free to grab them and kind of frequently asked questions over here.
Great. Thank you guys so much. That's
Jennifer, Tony, thank you very, very much.
massively helpful.
Oh, it's lovely to have actual experts on the topic. Yeah, we're winging it. We actually go to the scientists here. It's about time to open up for questions. And so usually when we do one of these things, we always sort of preface by saying a question is something that ends in a question mark and not a statement. An amendment on this one is that this is actually a time if you need to say something that is not actually a question, that's okay in this space. So say what you need to say, and we're here to listen to that. If you are listening to the live stream and want to send in your question, you write it into PayUpHollywood@gmail.com.
You got it.
Thank you. We have a microphone over here. If anyone wants to come up and ask a question, when I see somebody's up there at the microphone to ask a question, I will cut over to you. But we can keep talking ourselves for a moment.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to bring up, because I know Deirdre asked that we make sure that you all know that we are aware that with assistance there are abuses that are going on, and they're horrific and they're akin to the Me Too movement. The reasons we have not brought those up today is because we do have a live stream, and when we do start talking about those and gathering stories, we want to make sure that you guys feel protected. So we want to make sure that we have that particular conversation behind closed doors, and we will be having that conversation. So I wanted to assure anyone who is wondering why we didn't touch on it, it's because we want to make sure that you are protected. That is our utmost concern, is keeping your identities safe and making sure that you feel comfortable. So just please keep that in mind.
Great. Megan, do we have any people who've written in so far to show us? Megan Rao, do you want to come up here and join us? So Megan Rao, you've heard her voice on Scriptnotes. This is the actual Megan Rao here in person.
Hi. Okay, so we have a question from Derek who says, with regards to protected activities and retaliation, how does that impact production employees who go from one project to another? So writers' room assistants, showrunners' assistants, often we see retaliation doesn't come in the form of being fired from that show. It comes in the form of just not being brought back next season, so never being rehired.
Yeah. It seems, Jennifer, you're an actual expert here. So let's give you a microphone here.
So retaliation is not just for protecting you for termination. It's for also when you are when there's what we call it an adverse employment action. So that means that there's a change in the terms and conditions of your employment. So if your retaliation can take the form of not being given a less plum assignment, even being given like a shittier desk. Can I swear here? So it can it doesn't have to ultimately be a termination to be retaliation under the law. Does that answer the question, I think?
I think so.
Okay.
So thank you very much for that. It is, as we were talking scope at the very beginning, a lot of what we're talking about is people who are on a desk for a period of time. So they're not hopping quite as quickly so that you're with one place longer. When you are in true sort of production mode where you're setting stuff up, breaking stuff down, setting stuff up, breaking stuff down, you are so dependent on those connections to get that next job, and it's a tough factor. One of the things I think we should always keep in mind, though, is that those connections are often the kind of folks who are in this room. It's the people who are doing the assistant jobs are sometimes the best resource for getting those things to happen. So we are always referrals for each other.
Mm-hmm. And I think just to add to that, one thing that we are trying to bring about, and that's what John and Craig have been doing on Scriptnotes, that's what Gemara and I have been doing with PayUpHollywood, and that's what Alison's been doing with YEA. We're trying to change the culture of Hollywood to recognize that assistants are people. And so to be treated as human beings and not as and not as disposable. To not be treated as though there's 1,000 people behind you waiting for this job. And I think when we actually, what we've been doing now and the conversations that have been had in writers' rooms and in offices, I've talked to execs and I've talked to showrunners who are all trying to do their part in changing that culture. And they're holding open conversations with assistants, with the other writers, where they're all saying, what can we do? And I think for the first time, we're realizing that instead of this jack of all trades, this person that you go to for anything, who is expected to basically be your Rosie from the Jetsons and can do it all for a low price of however much you're making a week, they're realizing these are actual people that we are burning out and that we are not taking care of, and we are expecting them to take care of us. And instead, we are making it so that they do not have they're not living healthy lives, and they're not living happy lives, and we need to start making that a priority.
And just to jump in real quick on that, just the toxic culture right now, especially in young Hollywood, but even thinking about like old bosses I've had, they're just so busy, and we talked about this earlier. They're so busy, so overscheduled. You work on their calendars. It's like, how can they think outside of themselves when they're so in it? And then they have their families. Like, it's just not on their mind, and it's not to, I'm just trying to show compassion to them. It's not to give them an excuse, but it's like, again, it's just having the conversation is the most important thing, because they're like, oh yeah, of course I need to think about my assistant. But a lot of them just aren't. And so it's, again, disrupting the culture around it is really the way to do it.
Yeah, because there are great bosses out there. There are amazing bosses out there, and then there are bad bosses out there. And the fact is, they're still not in charge of how much you get paid, for the most part. And Hollywood has basically, taken this pay your dues and put in the work and slave until you make it big. And it's turned it into, you need to take a second job. You need to get money from your parents. And ultimately, it's the culture that we need to change, that we need to cancel.
All right, we have people at the microphone here. So if you want to say your name, awesome. If you don't want to say your name, that's cool too. Hello.
Hi. My name's Hannah. Thank you for opening this up to statements. I appreciate it. And thank you for hosting this. I hope I speak for most of us, or I'm so excited to be here. My first thing is just a little suggestion. You talked a little bit about unions. I'm a script coordinator. Script coordinators and writers' assistants are so excited to be unionized, and we've built ourselves a street rate. So you're talking about that right number to get us paid. That's something that I know there's lots of people in here who don't have that luxury, but if you need more information on that, let me know. In that vein, goals for the future, this is the right way to start this conversation, but the subtext here is that our work should have higher value. And I think that needs to be emphasized more heavily, and that's where I'd like to see this conversation go. That big gap between the work that assistants are doing and the work that their bosses are doing, if you actually examine the tasks being performed and the idea that assistants are apprentices and should be getting ready to do that job of their dreams that does have that paycheck that's 10 or 20 or 50 times bigger, we're doing that work right now for free. So I'd really like to see this conversation move into a place where the work we're doing it's not just that we need more money to survive. We're doing work that has value that's not being paid for.
Sorry. What I like so much about what you brought up there is that you were talking about the work having value, and it segues very well into what Liz was saying in terms of you as a person have value, and recognizing that both can be true and both are easier to acknowledge if you're paying that person something closer to what they're actually worth. Yeah. Sometimes when something is cheap, you feel that it is disposable, and you treat it like a disposable thing. If something costs more, you treat it better. And I think making sure that we are all cost a little bit more, I'm saying we, but making sure all assistants feel like they cost a little bit more and are worth more is a goal overall.
Yeah, and I'm just going to shout this out for anyone who's watching on the stream. I've been working with two unbelievably wonderful members of the 871, Debbie and Jessica, and they've been helping me spread the word about the street rate. And so for anyone who is wondering, someone yell at me if I do get this wrong, but I've been telling showrunners and anyone who's asking, if it's a 60-hour minimum guarantee, ask for $20 an hour for your writer's assistant. And if it's a 40-hour week, ask for $35. So anyone who's hiring writer's assistants right now, go by that rule of thumb. I'm trying to remember at the top of my head what the script coordinator rate is. If someone wants to yell it out, I'll put it into the microphone so people can hear. No?
Yeah,
What is it bi-weekly? Okay.
Yeah.
This industry, so I think those numbers that we are aspiring to, that you just quoted, we all feel are too low given the data that you guys have and given the comments that our jobs have value and the show can't run without us. Yeah.
Yeah. So to recap the off-mic conversation here for the folks on the live stream, there, in the sense that there's a street rate and that you're trying to make sure people are being paid enough, one of the conversations we've been having is that it depends on whether you're a 60-hour or 50-hour or 40-hour week. Ultimately, what makes living in Los Angeles survivable or not survivable is probably a weekly number overall, and it's in everyone's interest to make sure that weekly number is not only a real number, but also one that is pegged to grow over time as LA gets more expensive.
Yeah, the other thing that they mentioned that you guys did not hear at home is that the rate I just quoted was too low, so pay them more than that. Pay them a lot more than that.
I would just say that you heard from our amazing lawyer superheroes that as laws change, as realities change, as unions or new locals come online, people will intentionally or maybe just out of habit shift their practices to try and get around that in some way. So we very intentionally asked a survey question that included some work that's potentially covered by other collective bargaining agreements. So while you may not be a member currently of a union, whether it's IATSE or another, there may be an interesting conversation there to see if that work was actually, fought and protected for by a CBA that someone may have. So that's part of that education process to see if that is in fact the case, and we'll have ongoing conversations about that.
And I just want to say to Hannah's statement, and this is not as specifically connected to the pay, but it's like, bosses, mentor your assistants, I just feel like, seriously, I really haven't been in the years I was an assistant. There was never really a time, it was always me that had to have the difficult conversation with my boss where it's like, oh, I really want him to mentor me. All right, today I'm going to sit down and I'm going to tell him, I'm going to say, hey, I have this script, He knows, they know that you're a writer, they know you're this, they're that, but you just bring them in and bring them into your business because we just want to feel a part of it and we want to feel like we're learning something that's going to bring us to whatever the next step is. And I know on the podcast before you talked about for TV shows, being able to read your assistant's sample first. Great idea. It's not that hard. It takes like an hour to read that, So just having that transparency is going to make, if I'm an assistant, it's going to make me want to work harder and make me really care about what I'm doing. The pay, of course, have that too, but I think it kind of goes hand in hand.
Great. Is that another person here?
Hi. Thank you all for doing this. It's great starting dialogue and everything. And I was just wondering, part of the issue about starting a dialogue is this is very personal in the sense that the people that you need to talk to affect change are often the people who employ you. And so that initial conversation, I think Jamar, you'd give an example of an assistant or a producer who had been an assistant 45 years ago and maybe they don't quite understand what the status of things are in LA. I think if you try and start this conversation, sometimes it can kind of come off like they didn't pay their dues or they didn't suffer, or whatever the right terminology is. And so I'm just wondering what we can do that first question or first statement that we make to them to start the conversation, so it's not coming off as it's personal or anything. It's more just I want you to know what the situation is. So
That's absolutely why we kind of structured putting the survey right up front. I'm sure by this point, most people working in Hollywood have heard about what's going on, but again, are going to bring their own assumptions and their own experience to it. So first week of December, we'll be having the full survey results out with a recap if your boss likes to go really deep on reading something, or if they're just like a really executive summary kind of gal, that's fine too. But just to say, like, this is not a direct attack from me to you. Maybe you're a tremendous ally and that's great. Just here's an update of where things are, like, very objectively, and kind of what that means. And I think it's always great to assume or pretend to assume that someone wants to be an ally or wants to learn. Just to say, like, here's maybe what I'm seeing here, here's what my friends are seeing, but we're trying to take the onus off of you guys, since retaliation is real and fair retaliation is very valid. Like, a lot of people have been reaching out about that. So I think that's one thing. I also think if there are other examples that you guys are hearing from current assistants, former assistants that you think are really illustrative, please let us know. Actually, the press has been doing a pretty fantastic job in really trying to find what are some of those representative stories, so that you don't always have to say, this is something I have felt working for you, because that's a really charged conversation. But here's just a really objective, we're not going to get too passionate between the two of us story, and here it is in Variety or the New York Times, and here's some data along with it. So I think that can take some of that pressure off the conversation.
I would also welcome if anyone has ideas for how to sort of start that conversation with a boss or an employer. I think there may be some ways to sort of like subtly get it in there. It's like, oh, I'd love to, but I can't actually afford to because of X, Y, or Z. Or that way of saying, like, do you want me to do this over the weekend because I'm actually already at my 60 hours? Like, there may be ways to make it clear that you're not trying to be a bad guy here, but like that there's some boundaries, there's some things to be talking about. And so if people have suggestions for better ways to do that, we're all ears. So thank you very much. Hi.
Hi, thank you all for being here on the stage and for everyone for being here in the audience. This has been really meaningful to me personally, so I really appreciate everyone being here. I would like to have a conversation about the degree to which assistants are often expected to work above our pay grade in this industry. Big, big groan in the room there.
You got some ahas in the audience here.
And we are often instructed to do that to show that we have growth potential. I'm sure this happens in all aspects of the business, but I work in writers' rooms, so I'll just use some examples from writers' rooms. I'm sure anyone who has worked in that capacity has heard things like, I'm grooming you to become a writer. I'd like you to be in the room pitching ideas, which we're going to use in the show. And I want to see that you can write this show, so I would like you to write scene after scene after scene after scene after scene for other writers' scripts. And I would like you to write my outlines, which we're going to turn into the studio and network for no credit and no money. And the writer of the episode that's shooting this week has to go see his personal trainer tomorrow morning, so I need you to cover set as the writer on set at 6 a.m. And I think what can often be, that's real. I think what can often be incredibly frustrating is that often these shows will decide not to hire any lower level staff writers, and so they will just overload on assistants, which means you basically just have a cabal of support staff members who are basically being treated like cheaper staff writers under the theory that we are proving ourselves for opportunities which often never even go to us. And I genuinely think that most people who are engaging in this practice are not doing so maliciously. I think that they truly believe that they are giving us an amazing learning experience. However, from where we sit, this feels a lot like taking advantage of the dreams of people who are overqualified and underpaid for the work that we're doing. And sort of the question that I would like to pose to both the stage and everyone here, and as we continue to have this conversation, is where is the line here? Because I certainly do not think I am entitled to anything. I don't think anyone in this room feels like they deserve opportunities that they haven't earned. But at the same time, if you are going to hire me as an assistant on your show, that doesn't mean that I should also be expected to do a completely different job, which would pay 4 to 5 times my actual salary if I were being properly paid and credited.
So you may have been one of the people who wrote in to Megan, because we actually covered this on Tuesday's episode of Scriptnotes. We talk about sort of the role of assistant in writers' rooms and people who are doing what you're doing. And as a former WJ board member, this is a current WJ board member, the work that you're doing is covered WJ work. You're doing work that should be covered by a union. You should be making much, much more money than that. Where I think this conversation can be so helpful is, how does a room work best where that assistant, the assistant who's doing your job, you in that room, get the experience that you want desperately, and get to sort of get your hands dirty with some stuff, but not be doing the actual work. And so where that line is a great question. And where is the boundary between just transcribing stuff off the whiteboard and what's being said in the room and generating the document that becomes the actual shooting script? There's a conversation to be had there, and it's high time we had that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is all of the work that's being done, it's not just robbing you of the money, it's robbing you of the credit that would go towards your own WGA membership. And that's the thing to keep in mind, is that when you are writing scene after scene after scene, you are writing outline after outline after outline, you are not getting the chance to join the WGA and have access to healthcare and other perks that you would otherwise have as a full member. So it is something that we have to address. I wish I had the answer, but I think it's just going to be...
It's important for us all to just be having this conversation. I don't think anyone
exactly.
has the answer.
Exactly. I think what it is being aware that, this is actually preventing you from moving up. It's not necessarily helping you, it's preventing you.
Where this intersects with the WGA also is that where we see this, I think, happening most is on these mini rooms or shows where as you described, they're hiring some big names and like a bunch of assistants, and they're not hiring staff writers. And so that you're being asked to do the job of a staff writer without being paid as a staff writer salary. So what is a staff writer supposed to be? That staff writer should be that apprentice person, that first person in the room as a writer. And so how do we make sure we get back to that point?
I guess I want to ask a question as former assistant. I know there are showrunner trainings, right? You go all day. I'm assuming they're mandatory. I hope they are. Are you trained as a showrunner on like how to work with your support staff? Like, what does your support staff do? What are the is there a literal training for that?
No.
I mean, all right.
So
pitching it.
Yeah. So I mean, we could. I don't want to go too far off topic, but it is a real challenge that you're expected to be. You're a writer who's really good. You have a show that you've created, and somehow you're now supposed to somehow magically be a manager of people. Yeah. And so that training is lacking.
I've experienced that with former bosses, and again, it's just they just don't know. Like you take these writers, and some of them former actors, theater people, whatever. You take them, they're like, hey, here's a show. Now go manage like 200 people, and they just don't know what to do. And I think that's why like there could be great like leadership training, because it's like you have to be a leader and you have to think about other people's dreams. There's a lot of people's dreams under you.
I think one thing to keep in mind too, and this is not to say like I'm defending one or the other. When you are becoming the leader of a show, you have 1,000 things that you have never done before, and you're going to get every single one of them wrong.
Yeah.
So even though, we might put everyone through a leadership training where it's like, treat your assistants like this, do this, half of it is fucking common sense.
Yeah.
Let's be for real. Like, half of it is just don't treat your assistants like shit and be a good person. And even the common sense stuff, there are some people who just don't get it. So I think what we really need to do is make sure that you guys have options. That if you are going to HR with an actual problem, that HR is listening. Because from some of the stories that I've been getting, it doesn't seem like HR always does that. And sometimes it seems like the people that you are going to in order to get help, they're the ones who are keeping you in that situation. And that's something that we need to address. So we need to make sure that you are not isolated.
And there are companies that don't have HR at all.
Yes.
And just really quickly, this is why allies are so important. Maybe in that writer's room, there's one person that you have a connection with who is an ally. So it doesn't have to be your job to pull aside a showrunner and say, hey, I'm doing work that's actually, covered by something else. A writer, someone else, or when you guys become full staff writers and then eventually showrunners, you can say like, how can I be an ally, and tell me how I can be a better ally here. And you can pull them aside and say, hey, would you be an ally for me? I just saw, 3 assistants who were doing the jobs of staff writers in this room. What can you do? What can I help support you do to help fix that?
And I'm just going to say one last quick thing, just because we've been talking specifically about writers' assistants and script coordinators and the assistants who are in the writer's room. This is for all assistants in Hollywood, period. It doesn't matter which department you are working in, because it seems across the board you are facing some sort of financial or work abuse. And so even though we are specifically talking about, showrunners and people in writer's room, this is not limited to just the writing community. And we are aware of that. We are aware that this is a widespread issue. So please do not feel alienated if we haven't brought up your particular position. We are very aware that these are roadblocks that are also affecting you.
Megan, do you have something from the live stream for us to take a look at?
Yeah, so I have a question related to this. Amanda wrote in and she said, it feels like some showrunners believe they have nothing to do with assistant salaries. On my current show, the showrunner told me when I was hired, I have no idea what assistants are paid, so you'll have to talk to the production manager about that. And I feel like I keep hearing stories where, like the buck is pushed to someone else. So what should assistants do, and like who are the people that they should be talking to, and who's in charge of their salaries?
And so this is the case where we can move it out of just the showrunner thing to, I think a lot of bosses really have no idea what their assistants are being paid, and there's a disintermediation between, I'm the person who tells you what to do, but not who deals with your paycheck. And they've separated out accounting so completely from it that they don't feel like there's any need to get involved with that. So hopefully, this next year is about educating bosses in terms of that they actually do have to be paying attention to this, and giving people giving assistants the voice to sort of point out how little they're being paid.
Yeah, because also I think you and I have both received stories, and I've talked to showrunners who have gone to bat for their assistants, who have said, we need more money. And the fact is, there are business affairs offices who are saying, we don't want to set a new precedent. And if we give your assistant this $100 a week increase, we're going to have to give that to all assistants, and God forbid that we have to do that. So it is something that we need to make the entire industry aware of, that yes, every assistant needs a raise. Every assistant needs to be, making a livable wage, and we need to keep doing research to figure out what that is. But that's why we're having this conversation.
Let's have a question over here from the side.
Hi. So it's not so much a question, just as something that I think is important to also note, that I'm sure some people in this room shared this with me, but a lot of us are supporting multiple people. And so we're doing the job of 2 or 3 assistants because we're supporting 2 or 3 bosses. And yet we're getting paid the amount that you would be for supporting one assistant, when the fact is, no matter how nice your bosses are and no matter how well they work together, you're doing 3 separate jobs and are expected to do it in the course of a regular work week. And I feel like that's something people aren't talking about enough, because, we're happy to be there, or, our bosses are nice, or maybe they're not, but no one's questioning like, oh, it's weird that like you have to support 3 people, because that's 3 jobs. And we're expected to get all of it done, and I think most of us get all of it done. And it's never a question of like, that was really great that you were even able to do that. And so I think that's something that also should be of note, that it's not just one job all the time that we're doing. It's a lot of jobs under the umbrella of like the assistant.
Yes, thank you very much. Very, very true. Thank you.
I think just to even speak to that, it's like the team player mentality, I've been on shows where it's like, oh, you're the writer assistant, you're also the researcher, you're also this and that. And it's like, I mean, I'm down, love to do all those things, love it. But it's like, okay, then pay me more,
We also had a lot of people in the survey who were not just doing all of those jobs, but they're also a babysitter, a caterer, a car wash, everything. It's all those other things too. So, and those are perfectly fine things that people can want done for them, but they can pay for that separately. So when you get really far outside of your job description, or even what the fucking industry does at all, that's just absurd.
Jamara, talk to us about, when you're starting a job, what is the kind of contract, or what do you want to document in terms of what the responsibilities are for a job?
Absolutely, and we all certainly understand there's a lot of flexibility when you go into any job. One job description is not going to cover 100% of the things that you do, and that's okay. When you start to get too far outside of that, where again it's into some work that's covered by another department, a union, something you don't have a qualification, a certification to do, something that is unsafe, or something that I think is so far outside of what the company actually does, that's when it gets especially dicey. And I think that part of that is a legal question, but part of that also is learning that vocabulary as you're negotiating your contract or your job description, to say, I don't think I think that's something that someone else maybe is better qualified to do, or that's just not my fucking job. And that's also a scenario we talked a lot about, right? Like the business affairs is setting a salary for an assistant for whoever at whatever point of the job. They are not also paying that person or giving the person that budget to have a caterer, babysitter, personal car wash, whatever all those things are. So if I'm an HR person, I'm going to be a little bit concerned that Liz is giving the $50,000 using that and actually taking a bunch of money off that to save herself having to pay for those personal expenses.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add.
Negative.
And we've gotten a few questions in the live stream about like work-life balance and burnout. And so I think this is something more for you guys to speak on, but someone asked, could you please speak to the mental stress of financial instability and the lack of productivity that results from constantly worrying about it? So I think in addition to the numbers and thinking about what your expenses are, like I'd love to hear more about what that actually means for, you working towards your craft and how that impacts your life.
I'm also just going to jump in real quick because I know we brought up rent burdened before, where you're spending more 30% or more of your income on your rent, and that means that you're probably having trouble paying for other things. As of last night, 88% of the 1,100 assistants who filled out the survey are rent burdened. And the ones who are not, many of them wrote in to say, I am married or I have a significant other, and that is the only reason I am not concerned about how I can pay my rent. And if I did not have my partner, I would be in a much different situation. So that sort of mental stress, I mean, right there, that's just one stress. That is one. We are also logging all of the different mental stresses that assistants have been experiencing. And the fact that 91% of you experience a massive spike of anxiety the moment you start your job, that says something, because that says a lot. But it's understandable. This is a stressful industry, but there's a limit, because there's a difference between doing productive work and then working for your life because you are scared you are not going to be able to pay your rent, you are not going to be able to pay your car insurance or your health insurance, and you're just hanging on for dear life. And when the survey goes live, there are responses that have broken my heart, and I just want to say to anyone who's listening, like, if you ever need help and you're ever stressed out and you just need someone to talk to, please reach out to anybody on this stage, because we are the shoulders that you can lean against right now, and we just want to hear you and make sure you feel heard and validated, because everything you're going through is actually happening and you're not crazy, and no one should ever make you feel that way.
And I just wanted to spotlight mental health a little bit, because I know it's something a lot of people are struggling about. Anxiety is really bad right now, especially when you have a 10-hour day. Then you got to go to drinks because you don't know how long you're going to be in your job. You need to have your connections. You are so burned out at the end of your week. There are days I was just like, I don't know why I'm doing this. And I think that there is going to be a whole other conversation about mental health in this industry. Again, you can't go to therapy because you're working, and during the therapy hours are 9 to 5. It all is connected. And so again, further conversations.
Absolutely. There's also a bit of gaslighting that goes on when you say that you are stressed about money or stressed about managing all this. Sometimes the assumption is, or you feel like the assumption is, it's because you're doing something wrong, right? You're managing things inappropriately. You bought that extra latte, that bullshit myth that's always out there, right? Like that's
avocado toast.
Avocado toast. That's the problem. The solution is just avocado toast. Just kill it and we're all gonna be fine. Right. So that bullshit is what not just keeps this remaining a problem, but also compounds on those issues of the anxiety that people are feeling when you're constantly told that your reality is not true and that in fact it's actually your fault. And that's a very old strategy called gaslighting, and may or may not be malicious. People are just repeating what they've probably heard, but it has a real effect on you. So watch out for that.
Great. Let's go over to the microphone again.
Hi, I'm Kieran. The one thing that I would really love to hear more about, particularly for this next class of assistants coming up, and it's something that I experienced too, unpaid internships that are actually not internships, but that are assistants.
We have lawyers shaking their heads very violently.
And I kind of have a twofer. So when I first started, I took a job as an intern for a lit manager, but I ended up working as an assistant unpaid for almost a year. And it was the standard, I mean, it's the stuff that we all kind of had to do as assistants, but hopefully y'all were paid. But I've been talking to a lot of people since this movement started who are kind of in sadly similar positions. And part one is, we don't really know what to do. We don't know the statute. We don't really know if it's worth pursuing because of retaliation, And the other thing is I noticed that when I moved into development after working, I got to run our intern program, which was run by the book, and it was super rewarding. But the thing that I kept hearing was that, other assistants had to take second internships and, were being told that they had to do similar things to what I had to do in 2011 when I first moved out here. And that broke my heart because it's still happening. Like, I know this lit manager is still doing this, and I know that there are other people who are still doing this, and it's forcing, I think it's creating a big gap in diversity. I think it's turning this industry into something very classist, which is really sad. But at the same time, we have people saying that we want to show new works and diverse voices, but there's such a gap. And I was just wondering, what can we do about that to prevent things like this from happening again?
So we've turned over the microphone to Jennifer, who can talk to us about the law.
Yeah, just to be really clear, you can only have an unpaid internship if you're getting school credit and you're actually doing the work that you're getting that's related to your class. So, sorting mail cannot be an unpaid internship. So yeah, no, you have to get paid. And then just really quickly, and maybe Tony can talk about this more later, is that, we're trying to develop strategies in order to protect people who step forward and bring lawsuits. For example, not using their name on the caption, referring to them as John Doe or Jane Doe, and then also, or just using their initials if the court won't let us do that. I don't know, Tony, if you've had experiences with.
Yeah, I mean, there's real big pushback in the court system with going, doing a DOE, confidentiality, but there is a whole movement, again, with SELA and at the Capitol, and trying to change these laws to give us more protections and give you more protections. And also going to the point of the unpaid internship, yeah, it has to be related to school and school credit. If, the rule of thumb is if you can pay someone to go get your laundry or pick up your dry cleaning, then that's not a learning internship. It's one that you have to pay for. And retaliation, that is still the law. You cannot be retaliated against if you bring that issue up to HR, to the boss, or, you're protected.
And I just want to speak to, because I know how hard it is to not be able to say no. And there go all of my facts all over the floor. I know how hard it is to feel like you are being pressured into doing something that you would normally not do unless you were getting paid for. I was rethinking that in my head because I was like, oh, this is not coming out the way I wanted it to. I'm sorry. But yeah, it's basically you feel like you can't say no. You feel like if someone tells you to go do something because everyone else who came before you, regardless of whether it's legal or not, the fact is there are so many practices in Los Angeles right now that are violations of labor laws. And people are aware of it, and they're also saying it's just how it's always been. And so what needs to happen is that we say that may have been how it's always been, but it's not going to be how it's going to be going forward. Like it's Me Too. You cannot harass women. You cannot sexually assault a person and expect to get away for it. So you cannot put people through work abuses and labor law violations and expect to get away with it. And we are going to change the culture so that that is what it's going to be going forward. It's going to take a while, but we're going to keep working at it until we get there.
And I think, and also just to the unpaid internship situation, I think a lot of bosses in those scenarios will say, come work for me, and they'll give you promises. I'm going to introduce you to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to get you this job and do those things. You're like, great, of course. I don't need to be paid, whatever. Get it in writing. I mean, not saying that they should do that, but get everything in writing because those promises are empty promises unless they go fulfilled.
Agreed. Another question here. Statement at the microphone here.
Hi, I'm Amy, and I wanted to touch back on, sorry to shift it so much to the writer's assistants, but touching back to it, I think part of the problem is that up the chain things are broken, where we're hearing stories of people who are staff writers who are repeating staff writer level 3 or 4 times because of the short seasons, and that then trickles down to us where it's like, oh, well, you would be able to staff, except for that we're only giving, even like I've been on shows where the writer's assistant, or like this is happening more and more, where even the writer's assistant role is specifically given to someone that was met in a staffing meeting and not someone that is an assistant.
Yes, and thank you. So choose your metaphor. There's a pipeline that's broken. There's a ladder that's broken. Traditionally, you start and you climb up the ladder, but it's hard to climb up the ladder when no one's moving, and so there's no bottom rung to grab onto, and that is a problem. The other bigger issue is I think we need to look at is like some people can't even get to the start of the ladder because of the system, the structures that we have here, and so how do we fix these? And so that's going to be the conversation over this next year. The thing that gives me hope is I always remind myself, like, okay, all the people who are in this room, the people who are watching on the live stream, they will run this town. It's just what's going to happen. So ultimately, these people are going to be growing up. The culture is going to change because these people who are watching and paying attention now are also going to be the decision makers down the road. I would hope that we don't have to wait for everyone to get up to that spot to really see the changes happen. Thank you very much. How about another one here at the microphone?
Hi, I'm Jess. Thank you guys for doing this. This is so huge, and just such a big deal that somebody's looking out for us at all. With that said, I'm one of the lucky ones whose salary and got promoted to creative executive recently, which means I don't get a pay bump, which means I have to create boundaries. And luckily, my boss is a little bit receptive to those boundaries. However, when PayUpHollywood did come out, I did bring him the articles at day after, because I'm not going to be shy about it. Because otherwise, who's fighting for it? If we're not fighting for it, who is? And he proceeded, I tried to lay it out as, like LA is expensive. These are articles that detail exactly how much we should be making in order to survive. And it's hard for me to make rent, or like I make rent, but I'm paying over half of my salary in rent because I chose to live alone because I broke up with my boyfriend and decided not to move in with him. Like things like that. And he proceeded to tell me exactly how he would have gone about it, and that I had asked for a raise too soon, and that he basically put me in my place and told me that I was ungrateful. And a lot of the office environment is, you're ungrateful, you're not paying your dues. When I was at your age, which is a lie because I'm 29 and they were all 23 when they were doing this, I was making this much and expensing all of the lunches and like doing this and living with 4 roommates and blah, 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 and I moved here with nothing. And so I'm wondering, especially since we don't have an HR, I'm essentially HR, I protect our interns, I protect our entire fucking staff. And who am I supposed to go to? What ground do I have to stand on? And how do we fight, how do we advocate for ourselves in a way that we're not gonna be told we're ungrateful?
You got like a mansplaining, gaslighting twofer there. Yeah. That's nice. That's impressive.
Also, I just want to say, if you're HR, can you write him up for an HR violation? Like,
I should.
Can you drag his ass in there and be like, let's have a conversation about all the things that you did wrong and the way that you could have handled this situation. It's going to be 8 hours of your Saturday. Strap in.
First, I just want to make sure, I heard that. I heard sort of what you're going through, and I completely emotionally am there with you. That is so frustrating that you took the initiative, and it sounds like you presented it in a way that was thoroughly appropriate, and he didn't hear, he didn't respond, and that sucks. And so, A. B, in terms of like what you do in your specific situation, I don't know. And so what I really want to listen to from people who are closer to it is what their suggestions are and what the next steps she should take are when she's facing the situation?
So a couple thoughts. I mean, what I'm hearing him say is an acknowledgement that the company is not paying a livable wage because you're trying to live as an independent human being, and that they are not allowing any employee, not just you, to do that unless you're making all these other compromises in your life. Can you choose to live with other people? Sure. Can you also not? Yes. And as an employer, it is their responsibility to allow you to have whatever life choices you want to make, not stay in a shitty relationship or have a bunch of obnoxious roommates or whatever. And he's admitting that that's actually not the case, right? Or that it should not be the case. So he's kind of perpetuating an industry standard by both blaming you and stating very clearly what he thinks an employer's responsibility is to do, which is to put their employees, allow them to become put in unhealthy, unsafe, or just situations that they're not of their own choosing. So I think part of what's needed here is being able to amplify your voice, so it's not just you and one other person feeling totally powerless. I love Liz's idea. If you can pull it off, please let me know. But also, those are great stories, and that's why we engage with each other, with the press, with attorneys and other people. Because again, you did it really well. You told a great story without saying his name, without saying the company's name, but that was a really compelling story. And I know that there are reporters out there watching. I'd probably guess there are studios and agencies out there watching too. Hi, guys. But if you're looking for a story to cover that really encapsulates the problem, I think that's a perfect one. So as much as you guys are comfortable sharing a story like that and doing it in a way that is safe for you and for your colleagues, but a point needs to be made, we are right now coming from an education first model and saying, here's an anonymous situation, here's how people can do better. There's also a choice to name that employer. Right? If you want to, at some point, that is your choice, it's not our choice. As people want to at least talk about situations, and maybe it's now, and maybe people feel differently 4 months from now if they're not seeing progress. So I would just kind of throw all that out there. And if anyone is interested in talking today, a week from now, 2 months from now about a story, again, share as much or as little as you want. That can be extremely powerful because it's not just the bosses, it's also the PR people and their lawyers and the HR people who are watching this very, very closely. So tell your story and let us help you tell it.
And just to add to that, which was amazing and very true, it's the shame that comes from these anonymous stories being shared, because the fact is, your boss doesn't care about someone like you who is in your position, but he is damn well going to care about one of his peers showing him an anonymous story and saying, this person is a monster. How dare they treat someone like this? And even if his friends don't do it, Twitter will. And so there is a shame factor right now that is forcing certain abusive bosses to really examine their behavior and the moves that they're going to make. And especially the coworkers who told you, when I was your age, okay, boomer. Quite frankly, the world was different a year ago. Rent in a 2-bedroom apartment in 2011 cost $1,730. In 2019, it costs $3,250. Like, that is an 89% markup. So if you want to, have the numbers at your side, have the facts, and in the meantime, just know that there is an anonymous support system here for you.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm a script coordinator, and I guess I have a question and then a comment. I just want to say, to add to the conversation that everyone's having, besides obviously thank you guys so much, and it's so incredible after years of, be it 1 year, 2 years, 5 years of feeling abused and gaslighted and underappreciated. It's so incredibly empowering to have everybody here helping and listening. I'm seeing a lot of job interviews for and particularly script coordinators or writer's assistants, but I'm sure across the industry, where you are getting paid like an entry-level wage, but the job posting specifically is listed, must have 2 seasons of experience and something specific, like, for example, must have 2 to 3 seasons experience in a 1-hour network drama, okay? And for sure, if that's what you write and that's a job that you're looking for, then great. But if you just need a job to get to your next job to pay your bills, but you write comedy, okay, maybe I want to take that job anyway. So I just want to kind of throw out there that employers are very comfortable asking for people with experience because they know that that person can do the job from day one, but paying them with an entry level fee, or rate, which is also, still not enough pay. And then the flip side of that coin is I've recently talked to a woman who tried to negotiate for higher wages, over her union rate, and was basically told, oh, I looked at your resume and you only have 2 to 3 seasons or shows of experience under your belt, and I consider that entry level. And so I'm not gonna advocate for you to be paid more because you're still at the very beginning of your career, so basically F you. And so that's the other side of that coin, but I just wanted everyone to be aware that that's happening, and that's happening yesterday, that's happening this week, that's happening in the world with the PayUp hashtag, very much in reality. I'm just upset because
Yeah, it should be.
I have been suffering this for a long time. But the other thing I want to say, and John just mentioned the word hope, I was able to go this week to hear Gloria Steinem speak. And I think if everyone doesn't know who that is, Google it. But she is an advocate for women's rights, and she's been advocating for women's rights since the very beginning of the women's movement in the 1950s. And a woman asked the question while we were there, what would you say to our generation of people, our generation of activists, of women activists? And she said, you guys can't see this now because you're in it now and it's shitty for you now. But I remember the 50s, and I remember when it was shittier. So essentially, I have hope. And I just want to share with everybody here that even though we feel like it's really shitty now, hopefully in the future, we'll look back and see that we can have hope now because it's going to get better.
Hey, so I have a comment going back to the burnout thing, and then I have 2 questions regarding the survey in particular. So I think regarding burnout within this industry, I think at least the way I feel and a lot of the ways that my coworkers and friends feel is that we almost have 3 jobs at once. Not only are we working our day job for 40 to 60 hours a week and not making enough, and then therefore we're doing work on the side, like babysitting, driving, etc., but we also have the work of our own careers. And I think that is what leads to that burnout, because we're not only expected to have this day job that puts all these things in place for us to move forward, we're also expected, I think a big cost that hasn't been mentioned is networking, the amount of money I spend on drinks and lunches that I'm not allowed to expense, or paying to join networking groups, or all of these things really adds up. And then on top of that, we're expected to have an hour to write a day, or to fund our own short films and make them on the weekends. That is just impossible. And I think me and a lot of my friends end up getting caught in this cycle of feeling very guilty for living our lives because we don't have enough time to get it all done. So I think that is a very important thing to talk about, is that a lot of the jobs we're in where they're oh yes, when you're done with this, we'll move you up, is on the condition that we are prodigies that have our perfect sample ready at the end of that job, or any of these things. And a lot of those things require a lot of privilege, a lot of that you do get advice and mentorship and can pay for writing software and can pay for all of these things. So it's that all of that I think has added up to a lot of burnout within the community, that we're expected to have those 3+ jobs at once. And then I wanted to say that I feel it seems, and you guys can comment on this, it seems when the survey is released that there will be differentiation between this, but I think there's been talk about when numbers are reported by how much we're paid, that it hasn't been specified that it's pre-tax or post-tax, which is at least in my paycheck, a massive difference. And and with the state of the country as it is right now, I'm not getting that money back at the end of the year. So it's I think which is true. And so I think that is very important as we talk to more media outlets, because I think people who are against this movement and people who are looking to say no, they do get paid enough, if we're only saying pre-tax numbers and not defining them that way, a lot of us are not taking that money home at the end of the day. And then I think we also have been a little unclear as to whether like like in the survey, are we reporting our current jobs, or like I think a lot of us have like felt very conflicted, because I feel very grateful that in a lot of ways my current job is amazing and I have a very supportive boss that advocates for me. I still don't feel like I get paid enough, but that like my boss has tried to fix that and it has just hit other walls, as we've been talking about, with like business affairs, etc. But the job I really want to report is the one that I had like a year ago. And like that, so like, do we fill out the survey twice? Do we focus on the thing that we feel like needs to be talked about more? Do we just report our current job? Like, and because I think a lot of us obviously don't want to skew data in an incorrect way.
I'm so glad you asked this. And I had a, sorry, did I cut you off? I'm
No,
so
no,
sorry.
those
there.
are all the things.
Okay, cool. All of the things. So I would say a couple of things. We thought so much about the last two questions there. The first question on the survey is, are you currently an assistant or no? The reason we kind of put that up top as the threshold is to push back on the data skewing as much as possible. We've already gotten questions from the press about that, like how do you know if these are actual assistants? And we're trying to just keep like balance between credibility for the data and respecting people's privacy. It was really hard for us to get into in your current job, and if it was a past job, can you tell us more about that past job without making it potentially identifiable of what we're talking about, or kind of forcing people to that. I think we will have future vehicles for those specific types of conversations, but we're in no way saying that this one person is always talking about their current job. The whole point is that they've probably been an assistant in a couple of different places or a couple different departments over time. And there are some kind of qualitative parts out there, and certainly the last question of, is there anything else you want to share, which would be a perfect place to add that, or just send an email in.
Just to add to that, because the thing is, the wonderful job that you might have now versus the terrible job that you had then, someone has that terrible job then.
Right, 100%.
And so
Yeah.
they're filling out the survey and they're reporting it, so it's not going lost. And if you want to make sure it gets reported, send them the link and be like, please fill this out. But the fact is, we also need to know who's doing a good job, because that's the thing about the data, is that there are people who are being treated terribly, and then there are people who are being treated well, and we want to try and emulate the companies that do treat their employees well. So it's important that we have a very unbiased view of everything. So even though I know that the instinct is to be like, I want to take the people who burned me and burn them to the ground, someone else is going to do that. And we really do need to know about your current situation. So, and I know that there is a question on the survey where it asks, what is your weekly pay before taxes and what's your weekly pay after taxes? If you're getting paid an annual salary, just put it in the comments box, as Gemara had said, and just say, look, this is how much I make after taxes, and this is what we need to know, because for the annual survey, we can kind of guess how much you guys are paying in taxes. So, and to be completely honest, most of you are making less than 50K before taxes. Like, that's in Los Angeles. That's already horrifying.
Yep. Great. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because we were unsure, do we submit
Yeah,
twice?
no, thank you.
Which one
Thank
do
you
we
for doing
focus
that.
on? Yeah, so thank you for answering that.
Quick answer, don't submit twice, just so we can have the exact number. And if you want to send us an email, you can say, I submitted a survey and just wanted to provide a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking it.
Something you brought up that I thought was actually really helpful for me is that you said that you had to do 3 jobs, and the burnout of 3 jobs. And so there's the job you're being paid for as an assistant in the room. There's all the extra stuff you have to do to actually make a living, and there's the job of being an aspiring writer. And so hosting a podcast where I talk a lot about aspiring writers, it struck me the difference between you and your situation and a person who's selling cars in Dayton. And so that person might go home and write screenplays at night, but there's no relationship between the two things. And so that aspiring writer gets to be just clean as an aspiring writer. But you as that writer assistant, it is part of your job expectation is that you are also writing all that stuff. So it is all entwined in a way that I had never really thought about until you brought it up. So I just wanted to thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely, and that is, I think, what is so true to assistants throughout the entertainment industry, is that no one is doing this job because it's the job they want. They're doing this job because it is a step to the next job, which is very important.
And this is a thing that bosses tell their assistant. It's like, oh, you need to practice. I spent all these years doing this. This is, and we've built upon it. And of course, like how could you not be burned out? Like, we should not be burned out at 25 years old. It's just inexcusable.
To set the table here, we have about 10 minutes left, and so we're going to take some more questions, and we're going to do some wrap-up just to let everyone know it's about a 10-minute warning.
I think this conversation is kind of part of a larger movement that's happening in this country right now. The teacher strike happened last year. I think Uber workers striked, and BuzzFeed laid off 30% of their employees. Like, this isn't an isolated incident of workers being exploited, and I think that's one of the big consequences of being in this moment in late-stage capitalism, where they're mixing up exploitation with work ethic and lack of gratitude, and all these things we're being accused of being. And so I guess I'm just wondering, historically, but also now, how do you incentivize a business conglomerate like NBC or CAA to treat their workers better when the minimum wage nationally is to $7.25 an hour, and the minimum wage in Los Angeles is $15 an hour? That's just a question.
Yep, super quickly, it's always carrot and a stick, right? You can incentivize to a certain point, you can encourage, you can cheer them on, you can also make them fucking do it. And whether that's your union making them do it, whether that's a state law making them do it, whether that's getting attorneys involved, striking, there are any number of things, and that's not certainly for me to say, but there's a balance between the two. So I think when you look at any movement through history, it's always the both, and usually a little bit more of the latter sometimes. And this is not the first time, 100 years ago, 300 years ago, it's not a new conversation, but I appreciate you putting it in that context, but there's always a solution, and it's always a little bit of both. Let's maybe after, because I know we're going to get to the last three questions. Sorry, Tony.
I do want to bring up, so Megan has mentioned this before, in terms of an entry-level job in Silicon Valley is a very different pay scale and a very different way of thinking about that entry-level employee. So that's your experience from Google before this.
Yeah, and so I think the question of value, for all of these jobs, some of the job requirements are that you have a college education and that you have experience working in a couple of shows before this. And, right out of college working at Google, I felt really invested in, I felt really valued, and it was an entry-level job, but I really felt like, I just felt supported and inspired, and I think that helps, stave off some of that burnout, because it was like, oh, these people really believe in me. And just in the culture of the entertainment industry, it's like you're constantly being knocked down, and people are just like kicking you while you're down just to just to see if you can stand back up, and you can't when you can barely make rent.
And so just to bring up the parallel, that Google's a giant company, but so is NBC, so are all these other giant Disney. They are giant companies who can afford to treat these people properly.
And I never had to worry about healthcare, and I had amazing perks and benefits, which is something that you just don't see translated here.
Hey, this first part is for assistants. We've had a lot of conversations about anxiety and jobs and stress. Please look into resources like Open Path Collective. It helps low income. It doesn't match with insurance. Please do not say that, before you look into it, that you can't get, health needs, like your mental health. There are services available for low income people whose insurance don't match. Really don't want to discredit anybody from accessing that before you know it's a possibility. I think it's a wonderful resource. And then to the industry side, I just think it's important to note that we really need to prepare studios to hear numbers that match with years of experience and not have that immediately cut somebody out of the running. It's such a studio issue, and obviously I'm speaking to people who are writers, support staff, but then you also have people like showrunners assistants who are not protected by a union and getting asked to do union jobs for less money and less protection. So we just need to find a through way to studios. That's where it is. We talk about showrunners, but if you can't advocate as a showrunner, you're a first-time showrunner, somebody's going to be making that decision, and they're going to be making it for you, and they'll be making it for your showrunner. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I work as a script coordinator, but the issue that I'd like to raise is universal. I had an experience a number of shows back where I was terribly abused. And I just wanted to highlight that, and I think the lawyers can speak to this as well, if you're experiencing something like that, it was egregious, it was bullying, and in the same way that we've been encouraged to keep a written record, if you're, working hours that we're not reporting and that kind of thing, write it down. And that's what I did. I went home when I would have these experiences where I was screamed at or, just terrible things, and I wrote it down, and I wasn't brave enough to do it while I was still working in the job. But my last day, I reported this person to HR. And HR is not always our friend. Remember that they do protect the company. And so I, at that time, wasn't looking for anything except to make sure this human never supervised people like me again. And I'm happy to report that has never happened again because they did a full investigation, and thanks to my very detailed notes, this person was investigated and found to have done the things that I reported, and this person has never been a showrunner again. So, but I really want to encourage you because it's not, it's agents, it's people at studios, it's anyone in this business who doesn't have a proper sense of themselves or their responsibility in the world. And it fortunately, hopefully doesn't happen to a lot of us, I hope, but know your worth, write it down, and do something about it when you feel the most comfortable. And like I said, I'm sure the lawyers can give us good advice about the best way to do something, but keep a record is my watchword.
Hi, just really quickly, because I am an older assistant, and I think right now, especially in the industry, there's this misconception that we're all 23 years old or 21, fresh out of college. I know myself, and there's somebody else here tonight that have had full-fledged careers for 10 years in other industries. And certainly when I made this jump into hopefully becoming, somebody who works in development and advocates for writers, I knew that I wasn't going to be paid a lot of money, but I also did not expect to end up going into $20,000 worth of debt to do it. So I think there is this misconception that we are really young people fresh out of college, and a lot of us have families to support. I don't, but I know a lot of people do. And we've lived these other lives first, and we're capable of doing the work. So that's kind of just a statement I want to make to everybody out there. Like, we're not fresh out of college. A lot of us have had a lot of experience, and I think we deserve to be paid like people who have had a lot of experience, and not just fresh out of college too. So that's all.
Megan, is there one last question for someone who wrote in on the live stream that we should take a look at?
Well, I think it's a question that you guys leads into our wrap up. Is a lot of people have asked, what are concrete steps that we can take? What are things that we can ask our bosses for, and people who are bosses, what are things that they should be thinking about? And in terms of assistance, just how can we kind of leverage this momentum and the community that we have, and what should we be doing moving forward?
Perfect. Liz, do you want to start us off? What homework do you want to offer, and sort of what should we be looking at doing in the next 6 months?
So this is something that I would like every assistant who's watching or is here today to try and partake in. I would like you to log every single expense that you make, your rent, your utilities, anything that you purchase for your job, whether it's going to a movie, whether it's Disney Plus, food. Basically every single expense, and then also log how much money you make in a week. So basically log the money that's coming in, log the money that's coming out. Do that for a month or two so we can kind of see, yes, you are not making livable wages. Yes, you guys are strapped for cash. And it's going to be that data that you can present to your bosses and say, look, I have made a list of everything that I spend my money on. What I am being paid is not enough to cover all of this. So you tell me what's going to go, my utilities, my power, my health insurance, help me make this choice. And being sarcastic, but to the bosses who really are trying to figure out what to do, please talk to your assistants. sometimes there's going to be nothing you can do to get them the wage that they need, but talking to them and hearing them and finding other ways that you can help is going to go far. And if you are someone who works at an agency, or you work at a studio, or you work in a field where you know that there are other executives on your level who feel the same way, get together and talk about what you guys can do as a collective to help assistants, because you guys standing up for the support staff community is going to mean so much, and it's going to send shockwaves throughout the industry. And it's going to do what me standing up here can't do alone, what John standing up here can't do alone. John can do it much better than I can, but you know, it's going to take a number of us speaking out and saying, we are speaking out on behalf of these people who cannot protect themselves and cannot fight for themselves, and we are going to do it for them.
Can I just say one thing to that too? Any story I've read where a boss has successfully advocated for better pay, it took like 5 or 6 times of that person having uncomfortable conversations. So just like once or twice is not enough.
Gemara, some homework.
Yeah, absolutely. So Liz wants your numbers. I want your stories, and I want them sooner. We're going to put out our survey results that first week of December. So if you guys are avoiding family or avoiding dishes over Thanksgiving, great excuse. I want 3 kinds of stories. I want your stories of what's gone right, of yourself or someone else being a great ally and getting success. That's wonderful. I want your story of what has been or is currently going wrong. And I want your story, and I hope I don't get many of them, of retaliation or potential retaliation you've seen because of this. You guys are all storytellers, whether you're writers, development, whatever, you are storytellers. I can promise you this will be one of the most important stories that you ever tell for the rest of your life, is what's happening here to you or other people. So that is my Thanksgiving homework for you. I will include as many of them as possible. If you want to talk to press about it, that's great. If not, you would send anonymously. That is fine too. But you guys know stories or what changes things, so do it.
We got numbers, stories, and organizing. I want you all organizing. I want you to join YEA. We have 4 different committees that is just self-organized. It's young Hollywood. And when I say young Hollywood, we're like under 35, or if you're assistant, whatever. That it's just the term of like the body. We have environmental committee, politics committee, human rights, and we have Hollywood pipeline. So that is the perfect thing. We're trying to shake up this industry a lot. So come join us. You can email me directly at allison@youngentertainmentactivist.com, or find me afterwards. We can talk about it. Also, YEA is going to, starting in 2020, try this out. We're going to do a sort of AA-style support group for assistants in real time, not digitally. We're going to have a trained facilitator there. You sign an NDA, no phones, first names kind of situation, so we can actually talk about the anxiety and stuff, and just see how these conversations progress. We're going to try it out, and yeah.
Megan, you're getting a lot of emails in at the ask@johnaustin.com account. You obviously want to keep getting those. Is there anything specific you would like people to sort of be writing in about, or anything that, any stories you're not hearing?
Yeah, just continue writing in, and if you have thoughts about like things we should be doing, questions we should be asking, like feel free to send those in as well. And if there are like topics that we're not talking about, because we're doing a segment on it every week on Scriptnotes, like please send that in and let us know, and that's super helpful for us, and we will make sure that gets heard.
I guess my last bit of homework would be to always think of yourself as the protagonist in this story. So you are the hero who's going into this thing. And I think sometimes if you think about yourself as the hero in the story, things that are like really scary and terrifying are a little bit easier to address, because like think of yourself as you're the Aaron Brockovich in this story, and this is the thing you're going up against. Because it's really scary to be doing this by yourself. But heroes in stories, they have allies. They have Rons and Hermiones who are there to help them. They have people. They have a team, and part of a story is that there is a struggle that seems insurmountable, and then somehow they're able to get past it. So think of yourself as that protagonist, and look for who can be on your team. Obviously, there's organizing that's going to be happening, but like you can also self-organize, and self-organizing can be just like, hey, let's go hike Runyon Canyon and talk about some stuff. Doing that work, I think it's going to be really helpful over this next year as hopefully some bigger things happen. Thank you all so much for coming here tonight. I want to thank the people here up on the stage, our panelists, our great legal experts who are here as well. I want to thank our volunteers for check-in and all this stuff. all the folks who ran the live feed. Thank you for people who are watching at home. And thank you guys for coming out on this week before Thanksgiving. Thank you all very much.